Johnson, and this is focused on Liberia. Hit it! From Cape Mount to Cape Palmer, Mount Nimba to Atlantic Ocean, Obomi Hills to Pocondre, to educate, elevate, and promote. Talk about home affairs, in diaspora, current affairs, reliable information, history, talking about culture, politics, education, entertainment, business, sports, advertisement, articulation. Focus on Liberia. Focus on Liberia. Focus on Liberia. From Monday to Sunday.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another edition of the Liberia History Channel on Focus on Liberia. My name is Dennis Jai, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. In tonight's edition of the Liberia History Channel, we're going to be talking about African abolitionists. Who were some of the abolitionists during the transatlantic slave trade that were Africans? Yes, you heard me. African abolitionists. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And let me welcome our presenter, or I'll say the chief presenter. To many, she is professor and historian. To herself, she is researcher. Let me welcome Yeyia.
Hey, thanks, Dennis. It's always my pleasure to be here. And I'm actually very excited that I have Jabari and two of our mentees who very excited that they're going to be part of the discussion today. Graduates of the Liberia Leadership Academy. They are Paul. I'll let them introduce themselves, facilitator, and then we've got B. Jeremiah and Paye, who is a master's student with the Liberia Leadership Academy, learning about ethical leadership at the moment. And so, yeah, this is going to be a very interesting presentation. It's going to be a little different of a format, if you don't mind. I want the young scholars to kind of dive in, to the discussion and share their views and thoughts on the subject matter as well.
Thank you. So already introduced. Let me welcome Bassa Barry. Jabari, welcome to the show. Jabari is our Bassa brother from South Carolina. Welcome, Jabari.
Hello, it's great to be back on. It's been a long time, but hey, I'm back.
Welcome. And Cole already talked about graduate of the Liberia Leadership Academy, joining us from Monrovia, D. Jeremiah Nopu Paye. Welcome, brother. If you can unmute yourself.
You're mute, Jerry.
Okay, sorry. So as the name just sound, my name is B. Jeremiah and Paye. I am happy to be here tonight to be participant of the Liberia Leadership Academy discussions on how we citizens of Liberia and young students can be involved with our histories and the change making in the society. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. I'm so happy to have you for the first time on Focus on Liberia. We are glad to have you. Please make this your home in a special way. Let me give you a bottle of water here to say welcome and enjoy your stay.
Thank you, thank you.
Uh, Let me also welcome Trust City. He's a facilitator at the Liberia Leadership Academy. Also, a graduate from there. Now he's back to facilitate. Paul, welcome.
Yes, thank you once again, Mr. Dennis Jah, for having me here. It's a pleasure and honor to be here once more. I don't know if it's for the third or fourth time, but regardless, it's good to be here.
And also, Paul was part of that. I think it was our July 26th. You were in the street with our reporter asking questions.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
many enjoyed that, and they want us to do that again. But let me welcome all our viewers from across the globe. This is the Liberia History Channel. We are very, very happy to have all of you here to talk about African abolitionists. Just as a way of intro, before I even bring in our chief presenter here, Call. And Call, you're doing a tremendous job. I want us to talk a little bit, people hearing the Liberia Leadership Academy and then history and all that. I don't want anybody to be confused here. So let's talk a little bit about the Liberia Leadership Academy and what these young scholars are doing there and what your role has been, Jabari, and everybody else. So let's talk a little bit. Let's take at least 10 minutes to talk about that. Call.
Yeah. So the Leadership Academy is a joint effort between BAIO and Save the State Liberia. What we do is basically we have young people, young leaders who are already taking initiative in their communities in Liberia, recruit them, and then we work with them on things like Liberian history, ethics. Our main focus really is ethical citizenship, but we also supplement that and incorporate a very comprehensive history curriculum. Most of this, in fact, all of our students are educated. They're either university graduates or students, and as I said already, they're leaders. The ethics component, um, ethics and civics, incorporating what the 1847 Constitution, the 1986 Constitution, understanding the differences between the two, understanding our preamble and the Declaration of Independence, focusing on all of the foundations that the country was built on, and then also leading up to what is our responsibility as citizens of Liberia, what is our duty, our bounden duty. Besides, everyone always wants to know what a country can do, what it can get out of Liberia, what is a citizen's role and responsibility to their country. And by the time they come out of the class, I think, and I'll let them speak for themselves, but I believe that though they were already leaders, they were already very, very bright, they are extremely intelligent, I think this gives them an extra boost of confidence, knowing so much about themselves. Because many times the curriculum is not self-focused, it's not introspective, it's not really about us. We learn more about the world than we do about our own country. So this gives them a little bit of that boost of confidence, knowing exactly, what has transpired to make the country what it is, the greatness of the past, the errors of the past, and putting all of that together to understand where they stand as Liberian citizens today. It has been quite a beautiful experience working with the young people. I learn every time I interact with them as well.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Ladies and gentlemen, there we have the Liberia Leadership Academy. If you have not already done so, join us every Saturday. Call Jabari and the rest of the crew conduct this class, and they're doing tremendously well. At some point, it costs money to do all this, and so we need your help so that the young people there learn. Anytime we sit away from Liberia, we look at what is obtaining, and you see young people in the street just dancing, but not everybody is doing that. There are some serious, and I'm not saying the others are not serious, but there are some Liberians who really bury their heads to study about our country, ethics, and everything else. So, gentlemen, I'm very thankful that you are here, and just keep doing what you're doing. Let's get started on our topic tonight. And I want us to start with, the African abolitionists. Carl, why you want to talk about this? Many people, when I told them, they say, "What? You are you saying they were African abolitionists?" Oh,
So
because
when we talk about history, that is, when we talk about Liberian history, we do, well, I don't know how many episodes of Liberian History Channel we've done. I've always um, assumed that it was understood that African people were involved in the abolitionist struggle. And I think in passing, we make mention of it, but it's never been the focus of any of the subject matter. And once in class, one of the students was asking, so all the native people were just slave traders. None of them wanted to stop the slave trade. And it was kind of like that eureka moment for me where I said, oh, wait a minute. This is something that I should have been focusing on. It's something that I should have been emphasizing, because instead of taking for granted that it's understood, like obviously we were fighting against the slave trade, but it is not obvious to everyone. And so in sometimes things that we take for granted need to be stated explicitly. And so the purpose of this is to give some names, the ones who are documented. And of course, there are many, many more who are not documented. But for William Tamba, David Noah, and William Davis, their names are, because they were missionaries, their names are well recorded in history, and their efforts, not only as missionaries but as abolitionists, are very well recorded in history, along with others. But today I'm focusing on the three of them, because a lot of the work that they did stemmed around what is now Monrovia, Providence Island, the St. Paul River, Cape Mount, and Bassa Cove in the St. John, along the mouth of the St. John River. So the areas that are now in modern day Liberia is where their abolitionist struggles were. And this is before, I mean, we're talking about before repatriation and before ACS obtained property. In fact, William Tamba was one of those who were instrumental in introducing Virginia Burgess and others to people at Cape Mesurado and Bassa and other areas. Though they initially were not successful in getting land, Tamba was one of those who was very much interested in extending the no slavery zone all the way to his previous homeland, which is now Liberia.
So two things, because we've spoken about this before, we've discussed it, that slavery was going on in where today we call Liberia. People, because there's something that when I was growing up learning history, maybe I don't know if I forgot, but really it was not stressed that around where we live today in Liberia, there was slave trading that was going on. So in order for us to have abolitionists in that area, meaning slavery was going on there too, right? So if you are watching us and you did not know that slavery was going on in that part of the world, please know it today, and that there were Liberians involved in stopping this whole thing. So if you are here, please comment. If you knew this before, comment. If you didn't know it, like many others, also give us your comment. We want to know. Right.
Yeah.
So before we move on, I just want to, Paul and Jabari and Jeremiah, just 1 minute each about this whole idea of African abolitionists. How does that appeal to you? How does that, what is your take on that? Just a minute to let me know how you feel having African abolitionists. Like many others, I don't know if you knew that before. Let me start with Jerry.
Yes, so thank you, Mr. Dennis, for the opportunity. And so the issue of the African abolitionist, you know, I personally, it is not strange to me to have African abolitionist because going through the schools of the Liberian history and as well going through the ethical citizen class, there are a lot of understanding that I've acquired concerning African abolitionists. And so I'm aware of the African abolitionists through uh, the work of ex-president William. I mean, not William, but Joseph Chicken Ramos.
Okay.
In
See,
fact,
so if you are out
he
there,
was one.
you don't attend the Africa or the Liberian Leadership Academy, maybe it's time you do so, because here's a young man learned something that a lot of us didn't know. Let me trust. What's your take?
Yeah,
Yeah, I
so
think.
it
Oh,
tells that it tells that African have been fighting to narrow down human selling, that which we modified to be slavery. And so in 1819 we got a record that robbers stood against human slavery and across, and not just Liberia, but Africa as a continent, to ensure that human selling is abolished. And a and through the record, it tells that Robert did a great job to have Liberia today. And so
Thank you.
to hear about African abolitionists, is not strange.
Thank you. Trust. Just a minute. Let me get your
yeah.
feeling.
I think it's amazing that we're gonna put heavy emphasis on these African abolitionists. I think it's great because although we've learned about people like Joseph Jenkins Roberts, we've also emphasized heavily on the transatlantic slave trade. We've emphasized on Africans, selling Africans into slavery, which was a fact of history. But I think it's also good that we're focusing on African abolitionists, people who we can call heroes. I think it's great that we're focusing on the good aspect of what Africans were doing on the continent, also rather than only focusing on the bad aspect. So I'm heavily excited for us to delve deep into this.
Thank you. Basa Barry.
It doesn't surprise me at all about African abolitionists because when you center on your people's history and center on what we accomplished as African people, you understand when the slave trade was happening, you had those African abolitionists who were going, fighting tooth and nail to try to rescue their fellow brothers and sisters, those who were speaking out about it, those who were going to the continent to try to end this brutal, barbaric trade that was happening, that was uplifting and decimating lives. Oftentimes when we talk about abolition or slavery, it's often centered, oh, some foreign country or entity came and got rid of slavery, instead of it being, what did we do, how we did it. We'll often put it on foreign entities like the British or the Americans, instead of we contributed, we played the role, we were the ones on the grounds putting the work in, and people risking their lives so that this would finally be ended. So it doesn't surprise me at all that we had African abolitionists.
Thank you. Let me go back to you, Carl. So we can get this started.
Yes, exactly. So um, I'm going to just do a quick synopsis because, again, this is based on the historic record, on what they testified in court at Sierra Leone against slave traders, and what I was able to gather about their backgrounds from various sources, their own testimony, what was written about them by missionaries at Freetown, and based also on journals that were kept. So a lot of the information is based on other people's documentation of who these people were. Um, Unfortunately, I've not come across any of their own journals. All three of these men were literate and could read and write and probably kept journals. I just haven't seen them. But based on what I have been able to gather, that's what I'm sharing. So William Tamba, who was the main person, because he was uh, he was exposed to the slave trade for a much longer period of time. William Tamba's enslavement was different from that of the other two, in that instead of him being sold when he was acquired or purchased as a child, he was kept at the slave barracoon as an enslaved worker. So when they have the people in chains and subjugated, I mean, in shackles, locked up, waiting for a slaver to come and purchase them, they needed other slaves to provide those slaves with food and be able to cook and clean up and do all those kinds of things. So as a boy, William Tamba's job was to tend to the condemned, the people who were being sold into slavery. So Tamba is the second boy child in the Kisi language. And he was a native of a place called Vaun in what is now Liberia. So the map that I have there has no boundaries because, as we know, these boundaries were arbitrary, right? The modern boundaries for Liberia did not exist. So the time William Tamba was sold into slavery, he was part of this greater group of people we called Kisi, which stretched both in what is now Liberia and Sierra Leone and Guinea. So there, the boundaries were not there. So the Kisi people, where you see Baoun, is kind of almost like the center of where the Kisi people were. And all around that area, the Kisi people would be divided later into Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone. But at this point in history, Baoun today is in Liberia. So Baoun, if he were alive today, he would be Liberian. So William Tamba was from a place called Baoun, which is south of Kolaun, which is what people consider to be the capital of the Kisi people. But Baoun is further south, closer to Bopulu in Lofa. And Tamba was enslaved at the Banana Islands, where he was used to feed and attend to slaves awaiting buyers. He was owned also by Robert Bostock. William Tamba was a founder of, I'm supposed to say founder, I'm sorry. William Tamba was a founder of the town of Hodgebrook, which is also called Regent in Sierra Leone today, which was a town of recaptured Africans. Now, for those of you who are watching who may not know what recaptured Africans are, a recaptured African is someone who was condemned to slavery, but rescued, liberated, and then they would be sent somewhere else. So in Liberia, we refer to recaptured Africans as Congos. But what we don't realize is many of the recaptured Africans in both Liberia and Sierra Leone are indigenous Liberians. We don't realize that because nobody talks about it. But Tamba, being a Kisi boy who was sold initially at Cape Mesurado, ended up all the way in Sierra Leone as a slave. He was then liberated, and he was one of those who helped to found Regent Town. And he studied and became a missionary. So I have the three places here on the map. So if you can see, he would have been marched from Baoun all the way down to what is now Monrovia, where it says Providence Island there on the map. So they would have marched this young man and a whole bunch of other people. They would have had these wooden shackles around their necks to keep them from doing anything else. Some of them were forced to carry loads of other goods that were going to trade, whether it be palm oil or rice or whatever else. And they're carrying the load while they're shackled together, walking to the coast. This is not a short distance, and it would take weeks for them to reach to Monrovia, or what would become Monrovia, Cape Mesurado, or Duco, as our people call it. By the time they get to Duco now, they sell them to certain slave dealers. So it could be John Sterling Mill, or some other slave dealer, and then they would end up, being sold to people who came with ships to buy slaves to carry across the Atlantic. As I said, Tamba was one of those who was kept to be a worker, to be a servant slave at the slave barracoon, which was also horrible. So he witnessed in and out people being marched down to the coast, suffering, dying in a lot of cases, and watching the survivors be sold off to sea. This must have been extremely traumatic to watch this thing play out over and over again. And at no time while he was enslaved did he have the strength or the ability to do anything about it. But according to William Tamba, when he became liberated, when they shut down the factory that he was working at and they liberated him, And he started, learning English. He already knew how to speak English because he was working for Englishmen. But when he started to learn to read and started to learn about the Word of God, it inspired him to become a missionary. And it was through his liberation theology message that he started preaching against the slave trade, which was extremely, extremely dangerous at this point in history. So we'll go on to the next slide.
Right. And Tamba from Vahum. I remember Vahum were prominent during the Civil War. I think
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
There was a refugee camp, and I think the fighters, Ulimbo fighters, they raided that camp, looted and all that. So the 8 people withdrew from there, and that was a big news. And I mean, when rebels loot place, they're going to kill people. So that's all. Prior to that, I didn't hear Vahum. But
So Vahum was a place that they looted, the rebels looted. I didn't even know that. Okay.
Yeah, there was a refugee camp there, I believe. And that time
so it's interesting that you say, because when William Tamba was sold into slavery, something similar happened. Right. So you had these warlords that will go around and they would raid towns and kidnap people, burn houses, brutalize women. And, any men that would stand up to defend themselves would be killed. And usually a lot of these people would then be marched down to the coast to make money.
And many, many years later, history repeated.
Mm-hmm.
William Tamba.
Yeah.
That's my man.
So this is just this is a map with the boundaries. So you can see that Vahum is right on the border of modern day Sierra Leone, but it's on the Liberia side. But if you see where Guinea, Liberia, Sierra Leone meet near that red dot where Vahum is, that whole circle, if you put a circle around there, that's all the Gisi territory. So the Gisi people are trans-boundary because they existed before the boundaries existed, right?
Yeah. That Guinea area is Gegedu. That's that's where they are.
Mm-hmm.
I visited there. Then we have another abolitionist, David Noah.
Yeah, so David Noah, whose original name I don't know, but it looks like his name was Noah before he was even sold into slavery. Because they just referred to him as Noah, and then he took the name David and then made Noah his last name. Because we have to remember that there were always these interactions with Europeans and missionaries for quite a long time, especially among the coastal Bassa, Grebo, all these people. So the Christian names are not uncommon among slaves even before slavery, right? So we have to always keep in mind that sometimes an enslaved person may have already had a Christian or Western name, because people spoke broken English and interacted with Europeans, and sometimes people were fond of these foreign names and would call their children these kinds of things, especially among these Clau ethnic groups. So David Noah initially was just referred to as Noah, and then when he became baptized at Regent, he took on the full name David Noah. But he was Bassa, he was from Gibi, which is now part of the county of Margibi. So they took Marshall Territory and Gibi Territory, combined them, and made Margibi. But before that, the area, the Gibi people, which are a group of, they're a subgroup of Bassa people. They speak Bassa. So he was from that Gibi area. And Noah was sold into slavery as a child. He grew to adulthood in Regent, which again was that recaptured African settlement near Freetown, Sierra Leone. And along with Tamba, he became an important member of the Church Missionary Society. So the Church Missionary Society was an English, a British venture. He tried to fight the slave trade back in his own homeland too. So what happens is David Noah and William Tamba, they're missionaries. They speak, several languages. Bassa people in those days would be able to easily pick up Grebo, be able to pick up the Clau language and all of these languages. Same thing with William Tamba. He spoke his native Kisi, but he also could understand Bai and some other languages as well. So it made it easier for him And even when he was working at the slave factory and people would come, they would be from different ethnic groups. And he testified that sometimes he could understand the people's language, sometimes he could not. But he mentioned that an overwhelming majority of the people would be Kisi, Basa. He was naming the ethnic groups that were very frequent at the slave barracoon where he worked, through his own testimony.
So we see a
So
map
again,
of
this is with the boundary, because the first map is without the borders because there were no borders at that time. But this is where Gibi is located today in Liberia. So these are Bata people in the Gibi territory of Margibi County.
But how common was it for those liberated Africans to speak against slavery? Was that
Very
something
common,
popular?
very common, because anyone who has suffered the horror of being kidnapped and tormented, there were so many deaths in the march to the coast. If you were fortunate enough to be kidnapped, 10 miles from the slave barracoon, good for you. But some people were kidnapped 100 miles from the slave barracoon, 200 miles from the slave barracoon, 300 miles. And you're making this journey on foot, usually carrying loads of other goods that you're going to go sell. So who they're sending to go sell you're carrying additional things that they're going to sell. So you're a porter who is also a commodity. Let that sink in for a minute. So a lot of people perished on the way. It was too treacherous. Walking while you're shackled with these very heavy wood and iron combined shackles around their necks, usually, especially if you were a man, an adult male, or a healthy, strong female. They would keep you in such confinement so that you wouldn't be able to escape. But yet you had to make that long, treacherous journey through the rainforest, crossing creeks, just imagine. And then you're passing through towns. And this is very important. The footpaths of these old roads that these people would walk on and march to the coast pass through communities. Imagine living at that time and seeing these caravans of people being marched to the coast to be sold into slavery. Imagine what that was like. And this was an ongoing thing. This was a recurring thing.
So we talk about Tamba, we talk about Noah. Now let's talk about Pastor David.
Yeah, so William Davis, when I say his original name and place of birth is unknown, I mean it's unknown to me. And I would love to know if I could find it, if anyone out there has more information on him. But all I know is that he was Basa. He said he was Basa, but he was so young when he was sold into slavery. He himself may not have remembered the name of the town that he came from. So I don't know if he was a Gibi Basa man, if he was from another, maybe Riverside, I don't know. But we do know he was sold at Trade Town. So he was liberated from a slave ship that purchased him at Trade Town. So he perhaps was from right around there or maybe north of Trade Town. I'm not sure. He was later also settled at Regent, where he converted to Christianity and, of course, became a missionary himself. So these three men at Regent, they now, besides just not liking slavery and thinking it's bad and praying against it, they come up with this idea that they should take their mission work outside of the safety of Regent and Freetown and venture into these areas that were still run and controlled by the warlords of the slave trade. So this is just another map to kind of show, the location, the satellite image to show the location. So you have the slave barracoons at Providence Island and on the St. Paul River. You have those, and then you have the location of Baoun, where Tamba came from, and then we have region in Freetown, where the other blue dot is. So this is a great distance. In those days, they had roads, but they were footpaths, so you're walking. And also, of course, boats. So they could also take a ship and go to various points. But what they did was they worked with a white abolitionist named Coates. And the reason they went along with Coates is because the respect or the safety of just being with a white abolitionist, it was different. Because if they had not been with him, they could have been resold into slavery. This is very dangerous, what they're doing, because there are many incidents documented where recaptured Africans were sold into slavery again in the vicinity of Freetown. So you imagine you're liberated from a slave ship, you're taking to either Freetown region or somewhere close to there that's being protected by the British. It's a no-go for slavery. And then you get kidnapped again and sold into slavery. This was a recurring thing. So for them to leave the safety of region was dangerous. Very, very dangerous, especially as abolitionists. They could have been sold just out of spite. And we have examples of that happening.
And so apparently that abolitionist, that white abolitionist, was also part of the local church. Is that what it was? Or who set up this church? Was it all Africans, or you have British or other?
So the British is white missionaries. You know, because the Sierra Leone Company and the Missionary Society were British, and what they were doing was trying to repatriate recaptured Africans. So they're the same ones who are also teaching them literacy and teaching them about Christ.
Now they are going on a missionary journey.
Yeah, but what I want to talk a little bit about this map of Bunce Island and Providence Island. So everybody knows about Bunce Island being a very famous slave depot in our region. And, you know, Providence Island is an alluvial island, which means that it's created by sediment. So the shape and size of Providence Island will change over time. It is constantly changing. It's not a fixed, solid piece of land. It's what's called an alluvial island, which means that it is formed with sediment. And if you look at very ancient, or not ancient, but if you go back a few hundred years and you look at the maps of Providence Island, it was actually 2 islands. But over time, the sediment has, you know, rainy season comes, more sediment comes down, you know, the Miserato River, and the islands, the 2 small islands have joined now to make one. But if you look at previous maps, it was actually cut in half.
So you mean Bunce Island and Providence were one?
No, Dennis, Bunce Island is in Sierra Leone. I was just putting the 2 of them there for comparison. I said Bunce Island is in Sierra Leone. It's very far away. It's near Freetown. I'm just showing the 2 of them for comparison because I'm saying everybody knows Bunce Island was a slave barracoon. And I'm saying Providence Island was also a slave barracoon. So I'm just putting them side by side for that to kind of sink in for people.
Okay.
Yeah, Bunce Island is near Freetown. Providence Island is in Monrovia. Okay, so I hope that was clear. But did you understand what I was saying about it being an alluvial island? That's very important because a lot of times when people are researching this, they'll say, but it can't be Providence Island because they said there were 2 islands. And they're not realizing that it's the same exact thing. It's just that now it's joined, which is something that happens with the alluvial islands. They change shape.
Because dirt, rocks, and earth that flows down. That's what make the island. That's what,
Right. That means it's a sedimentary alluvial island, and it's basically made up of sediment that's washing down the Miserato River from other sources, from other tributaries. So over 50, 100 years, things will start to look different. And then even between rainy season and dry season, they look different. So some of the liberated Africans who, this is supposed to be Regent, a sketch of Regent. They built the church there, the schools and stuff. So some of the liberated Africans took on names like Waterfall, Sea Breeze, Rosebush, Rosebud. Whether they adopted these names themselves, they could have also been the equivalent of the original names that they used. So sometimes, like for example, there was a slave named Waterfall, he was Kisi, and the Kisi name for Waterfall is Balu. So it's possible that his name was Balu and Selkab. I'm just going to go with the name Waterfall because that's what Balu means. So we saw that happening a lot of times.
Yeah, I have a neighbor in Bannersville who was Sea Breeze.
Yeah. I mean, so this happened also not only with recaptured Africans, but with the crew boys, the people they call the crew boys who were living in these little coastal towns. You know, boys would leave their villages in Sino or wherever, they would go to West Point or what we call Crew Town, and they would settle there and they would looking for work. They often spoke broken English and would take on names like that. We have examples in Liberian history, Bato Obir and stuff, and short trousers, and you know, whatever kind of thing they would name themselves. Because you know, the same thing still happens. We still have people doing that stuff.
Yeah. We have all kinds of names on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very common.
Yeah. They can go ahead either.
Mm-hmm. Right. Let me see a question here. That Eddie asking, are there references of some of the narratives? I know we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
I see. I see Jerry is nodding. For all those who follow Tamba's lead, whether as heart religion or mouth religion, many others refused resolutely to follow the British Christian path at all. Some of these were Bassa people who had built houses in the woods outside of Regent. This was particularly troubling to William Davis and David Noah, who were themselves Bassa. When they tried to convince the Bassa to convert, one old man declared, I think I and the devil should do very well together. Mean tall fellow, I could help the devil cut wood to make fire good. Davis in particular was very dispirited by this. This Bassa group claimed that they lived outside of Regent because of sickness in the town, but Johnson's comment that they wanted to live not just outside of the Christian teachings, keeping their own grace, but also wished to live without society, suggests that it was British culture and control that they were rejecting as much as their faith. They were one of several groups that refused to conform.
Yeah. So this just shows defiance, you know, the idea that everybody just willy-nilly accepted Christianity is false. And a lot of times we have a similar situation that happens in Liberia under ACS many years later, where when the recaptured Africans, in order for them to be able to get food to eat or whatever, they had to pretend to accept Christianity. Because a lot of times they didn't. They were just pretending because they had to, you know, kind of show this kind of two-faced. Okay, for us to be able to get provisions, we got to go to church, we got to do all of this. And they were not doing it with their heart. They were doing it, you know, because it was the requirement. Right. And in the case of Regent, there was such a high concentration of Bassa people that they decided to just go and build their own town away from Regent, where they could be free. We have examples of that in Liberia as well. People having to live under the subjection of ACS, who traditionally were not Christian, and under the ACS, Liberians, people in the settlement, were required to go to church. So a lot of people, the recaptured Africans in some cases, went native. They went and joined with native people and just left and lived with Gola people, lived with Bassa people, and just became Bassa. So we have examples of that happening in our country as well. So this isn't just unique to regions. I just find it interesting that there were so many people who spoke Bassa who were sold into slavery that they were able to regroup themselves and build houses outside of region and in the, what they said were the woods. I find that to be very interesting. And the descendants of those people are Sierra Leonean today, right?
Right.
They
And it's
consider those people, all of those people, to be Creole people.
they didn't want to be Christian. They said, "Hey, we and the devil will be cool."
But eventually, their descendants became Christian and became Creole.
Yeah. I had a cousin who used to say, "Oh, I mean, God, I mean, you just talk to me. Oh, my brother was sick. You didn't visit." I said, "Sorry, Papa." There was a reason for not being. He said, "God is so merciful. Time he will not cast me to hell. He will ask me, oh, I was in jail. You didn't visit me. I will just say sorry." And so people have good justification for not being Christian, and that was one of it. And this guy is saying he thought the devil told, so he will call whoop. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
I
So
had
this is an excerpt from the Missionary Christian Society Journal um, from the year 1819. You can go ahead.
yeah, I had repeated occasion during our journey to admire the grace of God in both Tamba and Davis, and hope that by raising up such men and opening such ways for their exertions, we may gather that it will please God soon to send better days for Africa. Tamba and Davis have since regularly attended the school at Regentstown and have visited the sick there. They also render assistance to Mr. Taylor at Charlotte during his illness. By this means, they will acquire experience and be better fitted for their future work among their countrymen.
So their main focus here is for them to go and be missionaries. They're in which they agree, but they're thinking differently. They're like, we will not be able to do anything until we end the slave trade. And they're also pushing because they live in a safe zone, which is regions. They live in region, which is an extension of Freetown. They want to create this same environment all the way to what is now modern day Liberia. This is ambitious. This is before the ACS. They're wanting the British to exert their authority all the way beyond Cape Mesurado to the St. John River. And that includes Cape Mount and all of these places. So this is before ACS comes to Liberia. It's very important that I emphasize this because the British were never able to do this. And even after ACS comes to Liberia and they're able to, because they are Africans, as Joseph Jenkins Roberts would say, this is Africa and we are Africans. They were able to do what the British could not do. And this leads to a whole long battle between Liberia suffering for its sovereignty in response to the British trying to encroach upon Liberian territory, which they always wanted to be part of Sierra Leone. The plan for the British all along was for Liberia to be part of Sierra Leone. And they thought by even acknowledging Liberia's independence that they could somehow come in and just take it from them because they're Africans. But boy, we were some hard-headed Africans. We never gave in. So the seed that was sown initially was actually by these abolitionists, Tamba, Davis, and Noah.
Let's get more. On February 1, 1819, Kate, Tamba, and William Davis again left region, venturing out of the lands of the abolitionists and into the domain of the slave traders. Far beyond the relative safety of Freetown and region, they went to the Vi and Day peoples, where Tamba had spent years working for Robert Bostock at Robert's factory or Robert's port. At Cape Mount, they went on to the Bassa country, which was Davis' home. A meeting was held before they left region discussing the true objective of the peculiar mission. British agent John Brereton Cates was armed with an initiative to extend the existing British colony as far south as the St. John River.
Yeah. So you have Cates was a British agent. He was a teacher. He was an educator. He was the head of the school and the education curriculum for recaptured Africans. And Tamba is using Cates. Tamba is using Cates as shelter, as protection, because again, this is a British citizen. So here, Tamba, who looks just like all the other Kisi people, he cannot do what he's doing without the protection of John Cates. So John Cates, his mission, the British give them the blessing. Yes, go ahead and see if you can extend our colony, see what's there. So he's on an exploratory mission to see how far they can push this thing. Tamba and his colleagues, his two colleagues, Noah and Davis, they are wanting really to snuff out the slave trade. The British are doing so, but the British are not really as effective as they should have been. Because as we know, it took Joseph Jenkins Roberts to come many years later and actually finally give the death blow to the slave trade on the coast. It's interesting because Robert Bostock once had a factory at Cape Mount. He later on relocates to the St. Paul River after the British declared the transatlantic slave trade illegal. But before this happened, before Joseph Jenkins Roberts had ever heard of American Colonization Society, where Robert Bostock was at Cape Mount was always called Roberts Factory and even Roberts Port. So I find that to be interesting.
Yeah. So British want to expand, and so they are going there. But Paul, Tamba, and William, they on a missionary journey. They say, well, and they had their own mission too.
Yeah.
They say, yeah, we're going to, yeah, you have that, but we're going to use this.
Yeah.
Smart.
So.
Anyway, maybe the Spirit of God.
It's both. They were definitely smart.
So Bostock and Mason's compound were on the banks of the St. Paul River, name bestowed by Portuguese sailor Pedro de Sintra, who happened to first see it on the feast day of St. Paul. In 1813, an ally of theirs had his slave barracoon on that small island, and within days of board and loading aboard a slave ship, hundreds of their captives would be hidden there. Liberia exists today as a place of freedom in part through an act of redemption by Tamba.
Yeah. So Sa was probably his name. Sa was another Gisi boy who was aboard one of the slave ships that were liberated from John Sterling Mill's factory. So in the slave records at Sierra Leone and also on the Voyages website, they have all of the records of the names of the slaves that were liberated at Freetown. And anytime you see Za, it's usually Sa, what we call the first son in Gisi.
Yeah.
And then also Pedro de Sintra named this place the St. Paul River in the 15th century, so in the 1400s. So this place has been called the St. Paul River for a very long time, before they even had a transatlantic slave trade. Cape Mesurado was called Cape Mesurado before the transatlantic slave trade. So this is in the 1400s. Cape Mount, Cape du Mont, was called Cape Mount before the transatlantic slave trade. Kavala, St. Paul, St. John, all of these things, these rivers had their names before these names that we use today, before the first African was sold into slavery across the Atlantic. So I
That's a
want
very
everyone
long
to
time.
really understand this, because it is sometimes this misnomer that way in the year 1822 or 1821, ACS comes along and gives these places Western names. This is false. These places had these names before the first African was sold across the Atlantic into slavery.
So Robert Sport is not Joseph Jenkins Robert.
So it could be both. Two things can be true. They may have said, you know what, because Roberts did conquer the place, right? He did snuff out slavery there. He did stop the slave trade there. So it could have just been, okay, we're going to call it Robertsport in my honor. But definitely that place was referred to as Robert. It was referred to as Robert's Factory before ACS ever came into existence.
Robert's Factory or Robert's Port
Yes,
before ACS.
yes.
I don't know where we learned that, but it's like the way we know it, or we assume that it was Joseph Jenkins Roberts. And you say it could be both. But this place was called Robert's Port or Robert's Factory long before uh, slavery, the transatlantic slavery, or before the
Hmm.
ACS. It's important to know.
Yes.
And this, and as these young scholars learn these things, this will be, something good for them to explore more.
Hmm.
So Paul and Jerry, you got things caught up for you.
Hmm.
So, I mean,
Sure.
I want us to get to our young people so they can give their contributions, but this is basically really quick, Dennis. You can go ahead and read it really fast, but it's just saying
First
how.
Missionary Society, West Africa.
Mhm.
The rains of the present year on the western coast of Africa have been unusually severe and uninterrupted. This has occasioned a more than ordinary mortality among the inhabitants, and we regret to state that three valuable individuals connected with the Church Missionary Society, the Reverend John Collier, chaplain of the colony, Mr. John Barrington Cates, and Mrs. Jesty, have fallen among the victims. This
Yeah.
is the Baptist
So,
magazine.
so this is from the Baptist magazine. They printed this report from the Church Missionary Society in 1819. So basically, this journey that that John Cates made with Tamba along the coast, where he went and missioned with with people like John Sterling Mill, who was the one that sold Providence Island to ACS. Tried to get John Sterling Mills to convert. He met with former slave dealers who were still there operating, African dealers and mulatto dealers, and risking his life and his own personal safety and his health. But unfortunately, Cates was not able to withstand the conditions, probably died of malaria. But Tamba and the others were able to survive this and even helped to be guides to APS much later. So after Cates died, now they start to work with APS when APS arrives at Freetown. They make the connection and say, hey, if you can't get land here, we can take you further down the coast and introduce you to some chiefs. I'll carry you to Bassa. And everywhere Tamba took ACS in the year 1819, 1820, they said, no, we don't want another Freetown here. So it was not until Stockton and Ayers met with John Sterling Mill, who was no longer involved in the slave trade at the time, in the year 1821, in December of 1821, that he finally agreed to sell Providence Island. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is just an aerial view of Providence Island, and as we know it today, it's just a single island. If you go to the next one. So I don't know how well you can zoom that, but it looks like there were actually three islands. So it was cut because, again, it's an alluvial island. So if you look at where it has the little squares, that's supposed to be the Morovia. If you look at how it's set up, you've got three islands there, and they each had a different name over time. I think one of them was once. I mean, you have Perseverance, Gomez, and so on. But this is basically the same alluvial mass.
You got Bali Island right there.
Yeah, Bali Island is an alluvial swamp. It's not even necessarily solid ground. So nothing really ever happened on Bali Island because it's not really solid ground. So that's it. That's it. I just wanted to talk about William, Tamba, Davis, and Noah and what they were able to do. They did actually convert a lot of people to Christianity. They were able to convince some people to stop the transatlantic slave trade. They were able to assist ACS with getting to know the territory. And it was actually them, specifically William Tamba, who was able to make the connection for these people to be able to even be able to purchase Providence Island. So without William Tamba, it would not, Liberia wouldn't exist where it is. And his goal, his purpose was to sow a seed of abolition on the coast. His goal, William Tamba's goal, was to bring people that would support the idea of ending the slave trade. He didn't live long enough to see Roberts do so, but it was because of his work. And so William Tamba is one of these very important people that was instrumental in sowing the seed that would grow to become Liberia. And his name should be on the tongues of every Liberian child. I had to read Sierra Leonean history to learn about William Tamba. I had to go through Church Missionary Society records, Baptist mission journals. I had to go through Sierra Leonean history to learn about
Noah, David Noah.
about Noah, about all of these guys. And they because they ended up being Sierra Leoneans, right? But they were Liberians and they were critically important to the establishment of Liberia.
Right,
We
because they
shouldn't
ended
be
up
talking about Liberia without mentioning their names at all. About the foundation of the founding of Liberia. Instead, we talk about people that didn't actually exist.
So because they were on region island, they was on region now, so they
Mhm.
became Sierra Leonean because that area is in Sierra Leone.
Yeah.
But Carl, what qualifies them as abolitionists? Do we, because they were speaking against it, you could say advocates.
Because they were able to put a stop to it. Oh, I left out the most important thing. I thought I mentioned this. They testified against slave traders.
Okay.
They were eyewitnesses to what happened. So when these illegal slave traders would be caught and they would be taken to trial in Sierra Leone, specifically Robert Bostock and McQuinn. These were two notorious British slave traders that ended up being arrested because they were British subjects, they were British citizens, and they were taken to Sierra Leone and they were tried and convicted. Bostock and McQueen were then condemned to serve time on the island of Australia, which was a big prison camp for the British at the time. So they were taken from Sierra Leone all the way to Australia. And the descendants of Bostock and McQueen still live in Australia to this day, in New South Wales specifically. So McQueen descendants in Australia are very wealthy because unfortunately, though he was condemned to serve his time on the prison island of Australia, he was allowed to keep his wealth and he was given a bunch of land. So when Australia then gets its independence from England, these become the wealthy and powerful people.
Thank you. Now we Jabari, trust. Let me start with Jabari. Jabari, and I asked the questions about the abolitionists. They are abolitionists. And now Carl said something very profound. He said, I have to go to Sierra Leonean history to get the names of these people who did so much for us. because I mean, I never heard those names. I mean, from the History Channel, I heard William David, William Tamba, and David Noah. No, Jabari, give me your take. Why is that? Why we don't hear about these people in Liberian history?
Because again, when you have when your identity is based on the borders, you get trapped in this. I only care about what happened in this location. When we have to understand that again, before the scramble for Africa, these borders were not there. So you have to go into Sierra Leonean. You have to go into Guinean history to really get the whole picture because again these borders were not set in stone when Liberia was established at Cape Mesurado, Providence Island. None of these borders existed, so you might have to go into Sierra Leone history because there were many people who used to live in what was today Liberia got sold or were captured Africans and they were placed on Sierra Leone, they were placed in Liberia and other regions. So you really have to look at our history as being a broader part of world history, a broader part of African history to fully get the picture. We can't just focus on just, well, if it just happened in this area, that's all that matters. That's all that happened. You have to look at it in as a broader African and global history to understand its impact.
I mean, that's profound. And for those of us who during the war visited, was in Guinea, Ivory Coast. I didn't go to Sierra Leone, but just take the Kisi people for example. I don't know why we're so fixated on these countries, these artificial borders, because the Kisi that in that circle, they are relatives, and we see the same thing along the Nimba border, the Ivorian border, Maryland side, Ganta side of the Guinean border, Yekepa side of the Guinean border, kind of the same people, except that the colonialists just drew these lines, and we get so focused on them that we forget to even look on the other side. Let me hear from Trust. You guys learned this before me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. This goes back to what we talked about history. You see, to me, history is like different chapters that you have to go through and piece together to try to get the whole picture. And once you get the whole picture, you can be able to preserve, not only respect, but preserve and carry on the legacy of those who were before you. And in these cases, like my mentor Jabari has already said, when these colonial borders were drawn, it basically, in my own understanding, it scattered, all the stories of these people, and now we are left with, trying to pick up the pieces, trying to put them together to create a better understanding of who we were, where we come from, and how we came to be today. So it's not a simple task. It's difficult, but it's something that we have to do. It is a requirement because when your heroes are buried, you forget your identity, you forget who you are, you forget what you stand for, but most tragically, you forget your interests and you further the interests of other people, and that this is what colonialism has done to us. It has made us to further the interests of other people. It has made us to further the interests of our invaders, our enemies. I'll call them our enemies because that's what they were. But getting back to this, what we're doing right now, we're piecing together all the chapters that has been scattered, you know, throughout West Africa. So as we're piecing it back together, we get to understand who these people were, and then we can preserve them and honor them. It's very amazing that I'm even hearing about Tamba for the first time. It's amazing how this man literally bridged the connection between ACS and Providence Island, something that I never even knew. And it's something that I now know, which is very powerful, and we can share this information with other fellow Liberians. So yeah, that's my thought.
Jerry, welcome back. I know you're having some connections there, and that's why we call on everybody to support the Liberal Leadership Academy, where these young Liberians are learning so much. I mean, with the minutes, the data issue in Morovia, they're still trying their best to be on at this time. So, Jerry, what is your own impression about these abolitionists, especially knowing that Liberians were fighting? It's very easy for people on the other side to think that, hey, Africans were selling Africans as slaves, as if, without even knowing that there were some Africans too who were fighting against it. What's your feeling learning about these abolitionists?
Yeah, so as we are always excited to be, at the fulcrum of the Liberian history, I'm always happy to hear about Liberian history, and most interestingly, those who fight to elaborate our ancestors who built the country that we enjoy today, the peace that we enjoy today. And so the issue of David, the Tamas, the Noah who elaborated this country, it is not strange, as I said earlier, because we have been learning about some abolitionists. Interestingly, our first president, and now I'm more excited, in fact, to hear about the rival sport in questions. I believe the true story of other rebels who have a plantation uh, or ex-president Joseph James rebels. It could be either of them. So I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, the devil busy.
Yes. Okay. So I'm sorry. Yeah. So that was just a little breakthrough.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me, while you get
Yeah.
yourself together,
So
let call step in. Call. You said earlier that you were teaching the young people, and they asked this question. That was your own moment, saying, maybe there's something that we need to emphasize.
Right.
How is that? How is telling that story going for you? Because you see, many will say, "Oh, like bro, our history is scattered as this," and you are anyway. Go
I'm
ahead.
what? What am I doing to this? Our history is buried in a very shallow grave. It doesn't take much to pull it to the surface, but time. And while it was buried, it's not something that's lost, right? I say it's a shallow grave because I didn't have to dig very much to find the things I found, and we
And
have
that's
many
what I
other
want to
people.
say. So where you finding these things from? And I don't want you to cite sources, but I just want to give us a picture. Somebody will ask, "Oh, are there sources?" Because this is completely new, right? I
So
don't know for
it's
what
not
reason.
really new. And let me
No,
say
to
this.
us,
I
to
I
most of
think
us.
what happens a lot of times is when you don't look at things holistically. We've been trained to think of Liberia as an island in the middle of nothingness. We don't look at Liberia in the context of what was happening in the region and in the world. So many people who think of Liberian history, they know that there's a slave trade. I even had somebody once tell me, "Oh, they were only selling slaves in Sierra Leone, not here." And so I asked her, "What's the difference between Liberia and Sierra Leone that you would think that there's some invincible, impenetrable boundary for slave traders?" And she's like, "What do you mean?" And I said that we had Roberts Port. We had another port in Bomi. I forget the name of it. We've got Petit Mesurado, Great Mesurado, which was Bytown, St. Paul River, Providence Island. You've got Trade Town. You've got what was now Buchanan. You have what was Marshall. You had Fishtown, Sasstown. All of these places had barracoons selling human beings, all the way to the Cavallo, all the way into Ivory Coast, Grand Billy. All these places were barracoons. Roberts had to go incognito with cannon fire and gunboats, in some cases, the support of British gunboats to stop this and liberate the people. And it's documented in the ACS, American Colonization Society journal, is documented in British naval records. It's documented in the U.S. naval records. It's documented all over the place. But for some reason, when people see it, they just don't think it's important to talk about. Because maybe that narrative, doesn't suit a political agenda. And the other thing, a lot of times Liberian history has been more about politicizing things than to tell the truth, the full story. It's about pushing a certain narrative. So anything that doesn't fit into that narrative, they just cast it away.
Mhm.
Because how can you not acknowledge that William Tamba and all of these people were so instrumental in formulating the location of Liberia? It would not be where it is if it wasn't for them. Even the fact that John Sterling Mills sold the island doesn't fit the narrative, because they will say, oh, the man named was John Sterling Mill. Who named him that? He was half British. What was he doing there? Because the narrative is we were some kind of isolated place where nobody knew about until ACS discovered us. I've even heard people say Liberia was just swamp with a bunch of savages running around. So even if you go to Providence Island, the statues and the depictions there reflect literally people wearing leopard cloth for looking like it's the first time they've seen outsiders. It is an outrage. And it's not true. Liberia is in West Africa. It's the center of the world. There's no way that people on our coast, and it goes as far as, the reason I had to emphasize to you, Dennis, that Bezerado was named in the 1400s before the transatlantic slave trade, is because we have people with PhDs in Liberia who think that the American Colonization Society gave the Kavala its name, gave Montserrado its name, gave Perseverance Island or Cape Mount its name. They don't realize that people were speaking English on our coast before the transatlantic slave trade, before the first African was sold into slavery, because we have a narrative. If you say that, then you have to give more sophistication and more credit to indigenous people.
Yeah,
It doesn't fit the racist narrative that we were all raised on.
If you're doing a research and you have a perspective, sometimes you want to just confirm your own biases. Yeah, so you get what you're looking for. Titi is saying,
or you even if you see something that's there and it doesn't fit your political agenda, you will ignore it.
Yeah.
I have to believe that's what happened, because how can you study Liberia and not look at British sources, and not look at church missionary sources, and not look at any documented history before 1822? How can you not?
Right. I mean, the first time when Dr. Jason Carr presented and said, hey, nobody put gun on anybody's head. These two white boys couldn't bring a pistol and scare poorer men, because poorer men were warriors, so it's not possible.
It didn't. The story doesn't make sense, right? If you know anything about Liberia, what was happening there, people had cannons. In fact, the reason the whole battle went so sour with Elijah Johnson, these people, because they documented that these people were blasting cannon fire at them. So if you say the native people had cannons and guns, of course they did. They were slave traders. They were heavily armed. You don't catch slaves with rubber gun. You understand? You don't raid villages with slingshots. You do it with artillery, with weapons.
Yeah.
Even one thing I left out that I failed to mention, Boatswain, who was in Bopulu as a slave raider, a slave trader, his whole purpose and mission, Boatswain spent his childhood working similar to Tamba, except Boatswain was working on a ship, on a British ship. And when he got older, he was liberated by his owners and given the British flag, given a lot of weapons and artillery when the British stopped the transatlantic slave trade officially, and was sent basically with a military to set up a basic transshipment center for enslaved people so that they could supply more slaves from the interior. And because he was Balam and could speak Gisi, because Gisi and Balam are similar languages, he then marches into northern Bopolu, what is now Bopolu, and he's able to now work with other people and be able to supply the coast with slaves. That's who Boswain was. He was not a king. He was not Sao Boso. He called himself Boatswain because that is what he did on the British ship. And he said he was Bullum. And he was from a native of Shabar, which is in modern day Sierra Leone. So this whole idea that we have in Liberia, Sao Boso Street, it's not based in actual documented history. But we have a need to give African names to people who didn't carry African names because we want to believe so badly that somebody went and changed their names. These people called themselves these things. The same way we do it today.
Yeah. 3605-313-6004. The code is 791-403 #. That's the number to call to participate in this discussion. African abolitionists. Call or TT is asking about sources.
Yeah, so the Church Missionary Society Journal, one of the things that I learned very early on is that missionaries keep meticulous records. So much of the information that I get for the Liberia History Channel comes from missionary journals. Of course, you've got American Colonization Society records. You have numerous books on Sierra Leonean history. There are numerous papers that have been written by scholars, and I can actually put a list of things in the comments after the show. I'll go ahead and put a list of sources, but specifically to this, it's the Church Missionary Society. And then there's also British records on the trial of Boswick and McQuinn, who were the two British subjects who were working at or had their slave dungeons and factories, they called them at the time, slave barracoons at the St. Paul River and at Providence Island, which was John Sterling Mill, his father was British, his mother was African. Also Vytown, which is right by near Providence Island there. That is another slave barracoon that was controlled by Vi people. So you had, the place was dotted with different areas, people selling their market. Think about it in this sense. You go to Gorbachev or what used to be Red Light when I lived in Liberia, you want to buy bitter ball. You see all the people selling bitter ball, they're all sitting together. That is how it was at Cape Meserado. When the ships would come, you have Vytown, you have Providence Island, you had the St. Paul River. They could actually go from place to place and gather they wanted 300 slaves. They could get 50 of them from Boswick. They could get another 50 from John Sterling Mill. They could get another 50 from Philippa Hayes. And all of these people that were selling, yes, we had a woman selling slaves on Bushrod Island. You know, a half English, half African woman selling human beings on Bushrod Island.
Even today in Liberia, you can look at some women and you know that they can even sell slaves today.
So she was a very powerful slave trader, and the indigenous people used to call her Mama. That was the name they had for her, Philippa Hayes Mama. You know, and she was unfortunately following in her father and her American husband. She was married to a white American, and that was what they did. They sold human beings into slavery. A lot of times, children. You know.
Yeah.
We have horrible thing.
Horrible. We have callers already on the line. They want to participate. Call.
Great.
I love it. Let me welcome Mr. James Colley. Welcome to the Liberia History Channel, James.
Oh, I am so elated. First of all, hello.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for welcoming me. I'm so elated. I'd like to tell Carl, thanks so much. You've done, I don't know if you work with the panelists there, but you've done an incredible job. You know, I'm sitting here listening And even thinking about my own name, James, I'm like, what the hell did I get that from? But anyway, I started thinking about it, and just going through history, it's so educating. But I just wanted to make an appeal to Cole, if she can add the modern day history, because this is almost lost about the war. This civil war that we went through for 14 years, somebody would still write some books, and then 10, 20, 30 years from now, that whole story will change. So either Cole, I will pledge my first $100 if we can have a war museum. You know, have a war museum so that we can document some of the things that went through. That we went through during the war, things that took place, and people that are even alive. Somebody that Prince Johnson should affix his signature to it and say this is true. Some of the guns he used, so that would serve as a deterrent for future generations to know how war is so evil. You know, I remember when I was at LU, Dr. Yeckerson said this before the war started. He said, war does not determine who wins, but who is left. And so I want to applaud you, and please accept my first $100 as my contribution towards this if we ever started. I'm saying $100 because this is something that we all need to be part of. Have a war museum, and so even this current history that we live in now, if it can be added to that Asian history or past history, so that we have a complete picture of what Liberia is fully.
Thank you.
You know, what it encompasses, what it embodies.
Thank you.
From the past to the present. And so I just wanted to add my little piece of thank you so much. I'm sitting here absorbing everything. It's so it's educated. I thought about Tamba. I'm like, where did he get the William name from? You know, but
he was around British people. He was around English people. That's where he got it from. They rescued him and taught him to speak English. William is a common name in English.
Let's bring on Dr. Timos Gay.
Oh, thank you so much. I was going to a party, but I had to slow down to come enjoy this one.
Oh, how you doing, Artemis?
And you owe me for, I don't know whether you ever received the book. I'm sure you received the book. So I'm excited.
No, Dr. Gay, you told me you were going to send me your book. You never sent it off.
Yeah, and I never got it either. But let's talk that offline.
Good. All right, good. I'm happy because I met the vice president, the current president, and I gave him a book, and I mentioned William Tamba because his name is mentioned in this book, The First American Pie. And as I was researching, just Cole say our history is shallow. It's right there. But we have not taken time to write it as it should with the primary sources. And the filmmaker from Australia who did a very good work, just as she said, it's a serial story. And when I contacted her and about her film, she was hoping to do a film on these three young men. And I wrote about that, and I'm hearing you talking about it again. I'm excited because if we don't tell the story, we will never be able to push our real heroes or females of our time who did so much. And just as Cole mentioned, we did find the barracoon where we know the location where Bastock and McQueen operated on St. Paul. And I was telling the vice president when there, I said, this is a thing we should put a marker. I said, that's the first thing we need to start finding these areas and mark them. And I was so moved by what Cole also said. Those footprints could be a whole historical tourism site. Because at least we can have an idea where they were. And if we can do that, I think we are at the point to do that because with you, the History Channel, as I said to you, we have the people who are willing. It doesn't have to be a large group, but just as you have dedicated yourself or Brother Jazz or Cole, this is possible. And if we don't do it, no one else will do it. So thank you so much for everything.
Thank you, Dr. Gay. Let me bring on someone who has maybe I don't want to say disappear, but anyway, Ayume Jalapri Cassell. Where have you been?
Dr. Cassell. Actually, Dennis, I want to say this. Before AMA speaks, let me say something.
AMA.
Thank you.
Let me say, I don't mean she will never say this while she's here, Dennis. I want to say something. The current master class for the Liberia Legacy Foundation is being sponsored by AMA Cassell and her husband Dylan Faulkner. So I just want to give a shout out to them and tell them thank you for sponsoring this session of classes. So we wouldn't be able to do it without you, and that needs to be publicly stated. Thank you so much for your contribution.
Amen. Thank you. Let me join others, and say thank you because the class was, almost closed down because money, man. Bible say money answer everything, but then we're not getting the money.
I know it.
But thank you, Amen.
It's an honor. It's an honor. It's an honor. We can't stop the classes no matter what. We need to continue the classes because look at what's happening now on the show. This is what the class is about. So we can't stop. I'm urging every Liberian to please help us continue the class. It's a plea. I'm begging everybody to please. We'll continue begging you people for this class. The way you're enjoying it, we want our children to know it so we can correct the mistakes of the past and add to the corrections, the good things that happen so we can do more. And I wanted to say thank you to everyone up there, Jabari, Trust, Dennis, my sister Cole. I just want to say thank you for the work you've been doing. Look, Cole, I don't know, but you're one of our gems of our time. Like, I don't know. I say this all the time. And we just want to say thank you. And coming to our history, it's amazing how we just want to agree that we were some neat people living on the coast, living in the rainforest, walking around our hair. In 1822, the people came and told us, no, turn around, you can use your foot to wait, to use your nose to breathe. So it's time that we understand that we are, yeah, man. It's time that we understand we are human beings. We did everything that human beings can do. We stole, we sold, we liberated, we born children, raised children. We were greedy, we were full of integrity. Every human characteristic, we do have that. We are owners also of every human characteristic because we are human beings. So it's time for us Liberians to really be interested in our own things. Because when you get to know yourself, then you get to know your surroundings, and you get to respect yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to understand that, yes, I am part of this human advancement, and there is more I need to do for myself, for the betterment of posterity. So I just want to say thank you for using your platform, Dennis, and trust, man, thumbs up, trust. You well done to you. Thank you, sister. Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Thanks,
you. Open forum, man. Guys, let's talk before we close. Paul.
Yes.
Yeah. Paul, Jabari, Jerry.
Yeah, let Jabari go first.
And I was just going to say that I really want to emphasize the importance of what AMA just said about viewing ourselves as human beings. We have this, we're looking at historically through the lens of racist people who had anti-Black views that did not see us as human beings. And we have internalized that viewpoint of we were just savages. We didn't have anything. We didn't have contact with the outside world. We didn't have these greater sense of purpose. And when you look at your own history and you get into these archives and you learn about these figures, who they were, their stories, it gives you that humanization. We're human beings like everybody else. We're part of this world like everybody else. We had people who were liberators. We had people who were fighting against the slave trade that was happening. This stuff was happening. We're human beings. We're part of this human experience. And so that's why it's really important that you understand these people, understand these historical events so that you can have that greater sense of humanity, that purpose that we have, that we are a people. So I just really wanted to emphasize her idea of humanizing ourselves. We are human beings, and we should see our people as such. That's all I have to say.
To add up to what Jabari was saying, yes, he's right. We weren't just mindless people sitting like in the middle of the world, waiting for people to come and teach us on how to utilize our potential. Like everyone around the world, we had the freedom, we had the intellect to build up, to tear down, to cause chaos, or to destroy, to build, to create, to tear, to all these things. Just like everyone around the world had the ability and capacity to do so, we did, and we were already doing it. We're already doing it before, long before ACS could come to us. So we weren't taught how to do these things. We already knew how to do it. It was a gift bestowed onto us by our Creator. So yes, just wanted to add up to what he was saying. Knowledge is
Thank
not
you.
the property of one person; it's the property of human beings. Yeah.
And Jerry, you also have classmates. How is this thing being talked about among you young people? Those of us that are watching TV, that are on the internet, all we see a lot of young people, Zegue, Zegue, Munya, and all these different things, right? How are these things being talked around in your circle? Or you only hear it when you're among your colleagues from the Leadership Academy? How these things
I
being
know.
spoken about around the people where you are?
So I personally, I'm somebody who believe always to engage in as much we have gone through ethical citizen class and inform of some hidden informations about our state in as much it have been acquired is something that should be shared among the younger generation as well in our cycle to make sure that the mixed information is erased. So in our community, there are programs, I mean, voluntary programs that we ourselves involved with. Many a time when I be a institution that you organize, but then sometimes arguments will come like uh, most of the time people always have the mindset that, oh, JJ Rao did not do anything for this country. They sat here and they were used by ACS, and these are informations that are just in a corridor. Sometimes the information are there, but then it is being provided based on political opinion. It is not on a fair way or narrative. As much we have getting this, I mean, the kind of information, we come back in the community, we share those information with our peers, and sometimes provide clarity on some of the informations that they don't have clue of. And sometimes we notice that our society will just speak, will just speak on perception, on assumption, just assuming that these things happen, but we are not getting fat funny of what we have seen. And so we always in the cycle to provide clarity of what
Wow.
we have learned, and also as I always recommend to the team of the Liberia Leadership Academy, this is something that all of us can make sure. I mean, it reach to the larger point that even there will be an institution that Liberians will be recruited, and then make sure that they are trained. All of us are trained and be informed of our history. Because in fact, some of the when we look at the curriculum right now, the history that have been taught in high school, I mean, most of the histories are not real informations that we need to develop ourselves in terms of the growth and development of Liberia. And so sometimes you will see history teachers will just go on board, and sometimes they just give you informations of their opinion. I mean, looking at the political space, but not based on the previous knowledge that was laid, some of the foundations. We can stay on those foundations and build the country. Because when you look at the fight that Tamba, that the David, that the Noah put out, the knowledge that they use, some of them could have joined the missionary team, but then they use the wisdom to make sure that because one way or the other you have to use some knowledge. Sometimes in our perception, I mean in our perspective, we say you sometimes you added food to gain wisdom.
Hmm.
And this is why, in my mind, that what our people practice yesterday, and they were able to elaborate other people that were in slavery, and they were
Mm.
abolished model, yeah, those slavery. So it is very important. I'm always impressed to be, in the midst of scholars who discuss
Thank
our
you.
history. Yes.
Thank you. And you said something very profound that I want just to emphasize that because it's very easy for people to say, you said, I'm quoting you, oh, Joseph Jacob Robert didn't do anything. Or we
Hmm.
say, oh, this country since J.J. Robert days. And most of the
Yes.
time when people say that, they are not basing it on anything. They are only basing it on what they see today.
Hmm.
And you say, as you participate, you try to provide clarity. You know,
Of course.
I see most of these are how they call them intellectual centers, and everybody just talk.
Yeah,
so,
in the intellectual center,
right,
like the
everybody just
other time,
talking.
people were discussing the oldest king. I mean, people in Liberia king. I mean, talking about in South Bozo, and then forgetting to know that we have other kings, but then they are in hidden. The uh, 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 those kings that we discussed about in our
Candida,
previous
your favorite.
classes. Yes. So talk about King Kandibia, we talk about Dedawi Yakua and other people that contributed to the growth and development of Liberia today. But then they are not being, I mean, at the knowledge of the
Right.
majority.
People don't
Yeah.
know.
So
So we talk, my cousin used to say street talk. We hear from
yeah,
one big person and we just repeat it and repeat it.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, you have some colors and everything. We're drawing down the curtain. Let me turn it to call and call. Maybe you want to interact with your mentees more or
I
whatever you
mean,
want to do.
I'm very proud of them. They know how I feel about them already, and there are many more that will come in the future as well. You'll get to meet Paul Punto and Diana and Zota and uh, so many
Paul
others.
Paul was trying to
So
join, but we couldn't.
yeah, he'll come next time. We'll do this again. I actually will try to, because this was the first time we've done it like this. Next time I'll have them present more, so it won't just be me, presenting. But they didn't, we'll set up a situation where they can do more of the presentation. But I'm always happy to share things that I learned. Like I say, I'm a student of history. It's very much a passion for me. I am, I learned how to research and I learned archival research. I studied it and didn't think it would ever be useful. And it is very useful in retrieving information about Liberian history. So one of the other skills that I've been working on with the facilitators. I haven't done that with the general class yet, but working with the facilitators is giving them tools so that they can do their own independent research with online databases as well. Since right now in Liberia, we don't have a lot of research infrastructure in place. Um, and then being able to digitize things and share things with them that I've been able to access and photocopy and things like that.
Call with the PhD program at LU, maybe that will be in place now.
Yeah, they got a PhD program with no library, no research infrastructure. I don't want to talk about that, but we'll focus on what we have control over, which is what we can learn. And education is not something we can take a shortcut to. That is something I will say.
Yeah.
And people cannot advance their country if they don't have knowledge of their country. Every country that's great in this world has a very strong foundation and understanding of their history. If you go to China, you go to Japan, you go anywhere in Europe. I mean, Europe is a big museum of European history. Everywhere you turn, they preserve their history and put it in your face. It's the same thing here in America. You can't go 10 miles without coming across a historic monument. The Trail of Tears here in Georgia. I was walking in Roswell, going to the waterfall, and here they have to remind me that they marched Native Americans down the Trail of Tears, and it was a horrific thing. And I stood there for a minute. I said, "Oh, y'all just spoiled my walk." I had to sit and read the plaque and contemplate the horrors that occurred. But they wanted to remind us that this place you're walking was once the Trail of Tears where we expelled indigenous people from this land, is what the Americans remind you everywhere they go. Africans are starting to remember and retrace and rebuild their history. Sierra Leone, because they were owned and controlled by the British for so long, the British wanted to preserve their history in Sierra Leone. We don't really do that in Liberia. And it's unfortunate, and that's some of the reason we have an identity crisis. And so I just, want to say that I'm very proud of the members, the graduates from the Liberian Leadership Academy, the continuing students, the master students, everyone. And I hope this program grows. And I look forward to the day when Jeremiah, Paye, and Paul Saydee and Paul Ponto and all these guys are also teaching and doing their own leadership academies. Their futures are bright. You're looking at future leaders in our country, future senators, future Supreme Court justices, future presidents are coming through this leadership academy. And they are going to create the Liberia that Elijah Johnson and Joseph Jenkins Roberts and King Momolu Sao, and these are this is the generation they envisioned. This is the culmination of generations of struggle. And I think they're going to manifest that destiny and make all of us proud.
Right. And as you guys learn more, we want to deploy you, let's say Paye will go to Sino, Paul will go to Bapulu, and Panto. We send Panto to Riverses. So you can create smaller academies in these areas where they don't have internet. And you can have your classes under the trees,
No, when these men rise to greatness, that will build infrastructure, we'll have trains, planes, and automobiles and ships flying our coast. They're gonna build, they're gonna replicate the Eusebia Roy and all of these things. That's what's gonna happen. But they will know what has happened before, so they can know what's possible tomorrow, and that's the whole point.
That's the whole point. At this time, I want to thank all of you for coming. We're going to go around the room for a minute closing. Let me start with Trust.
Yes. Yes. So I have nothing further to say, but all I can say is that we should continue to learn and gather more information because it enlightens us more. And not only does it enlighten us, but it gives us more edge on how to solve problems. The more we know, the more problems we know how to solve. If we don't consume as much information, we'll be stuck. We'll not be able to solve problems. We'll just stay there and complain while the world moves ahead of us. So that is not the goal. We're not to be stagnant. We have to catch up and move ahead as fast as we can. That's all I'll say.
Thank you. Jerry, you're closing.
Yeah, so thank you once again. My belief, anytime I have imaginations of Liberia, I strongly believe that, one of the things that have slowed down our development to invest is the investments of the human resource development. Because once the mind is not developed, you have all of the infrastructure, there will be no prosperity. So I'm always glad to participate in such capacity buildings to enable me, at least anytime we having even a Palaho discussion, some of us will have more chances to provide clarity to all of the peers that will have communication with, in terms of how we can move forward to make Liberia better. So I'm all happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Jabari?
I will say that it is important that you study history and read. Reading is the most important thing. It's time consuming, it takes a lot of energy, but you have to read in order to understand the full picture or to understand the context in which events happen. Because once you understand that, things start to make sense, it starts to add up, and you can follow along. Oftentimes, we're not doing the necessary background, or we have a certain political motive. And because of that, we're making up stuff to fill it in instead of looking at the records, the sources, the resources that we have, so that we can give the accurate picture and give the picture as to why things happen. William Tamba, David Noah, and William Davies are important because it gives context to Providence Island. It gives a background, a reason as to why ACS was even allowed to do this. It made everything starts to fall into place. It makes sense why Liberia was established as this abolitionist place. But if you're not doing that, you're not going to understand why. You're going to be trying to make stuff up to fill it in because you're not taking that time to actually get into the archives and get into the information that was left. Liberia has a lot of information, more than a lot of countries around this world. And
Right.
we should be using it to our benefit and to our development as a country, as a people, so that we can be proud of ourselves and what we've accomplished and what we came from and where we can go.
Exactly.
Thank you. And we are encouraging all of you watching us to donate to the Liberia History Channel. Somebody power in Liberia listen to watch the last show we did, and the person said, I wish this was on all the radio stations in Liberia. In order for us to do that, we need your donation, your help. Actually, we've tried many of the radio stations. It's getting more and more difficult, so we want to build our own radio station so we can teach these things from Cape Mount to Cape Palmas so that everybody will hear it. Call, you're closing.
That's all I have to say. It's very late in Liberia. So Jeremiah and Paul, thank you very much for staying up until the wee hours. We'll try to do it earlier next time. Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for your support. And I'm so proud of you guys. I'm very proud of you. Have a good night.
All right.
Thank you
Thank
all
you.
for coming. I want to thank our viewers for watching. Thank you guys in Monrovia here, and thanks to Carl. We thank to all the people behind the research and everything, including our sister from Australia.
Yeah.
All the Save the State crew. Thank you all for what you do. Thanks for viewing, those who are watching, even those who will watch later. Until then, we close with the song that says, we are all Liberians. Have a good night, and God bless you.
Thank you.
We are Liberians.